What's up? Back again, video 64. Today's video is called How to Start Wizarding Right Now. So, it is possible to simplify this down into a 15-minute video. I decided that. I realized how many videos I had to make so far. And really, there's a lot of theory behind it that it really helps to understand, you know. It's not like you absolutely have to, but it really helps, and it'll improve the quality of everything you do if you have a basic conceptual theory of how it can work, right? But on the other hand, we all have the natural ability to do wizarding every moment, and we do. Everyone does every day, but it's really sloppy, and most of what we do is harmful to us, actually, and most of what we do keeps us stuck because we get into conceptual rigidity. Like, if we get some scheme and routine that quote unquote works, right, we tend to stay with it until something really disruptive like comes along and breaks it up. Like, we have a really ritualistic addiction to habits. And my illustration of that will be, think about how many routines you have that are just like dead mechanical routines that you don't even enjoy. Like things that started out as this like enjoyable activity or a hobby becomes completely rote, and to the point where you're so used to doing it that as you're doing it, you're not even enjoying it or experiencing it. You're thinking about somewhere else, and your head is off somewhere else in the future or the past or some different setting, right? So what we got to do is align the conceptual with what we desire and what we want, what is truly of benefit and what is truly beneficial to us, right? So how do you wizard every day? Okay, well, there's three main powers of wizarding, okay? Our thoughts, our words, and our deeds. So actions of our body, our speech, and our mind. And when I say speech, I mean, people can think about how casting a spell, enchanting, right? Enchanting, that's just the word for singing. You're singing on someone. That's how you enchant them, right? But there's all kinds of enchantment. So what's a chant, okay? So that's basic words combined with rhythm and usually rhyme. But it doesn't have to be. What it is the force that's behind it mentally, like your inner concept of the meaning and significance and power of the words. So that's one component, and that's probably the most important component. But there is a vibrational component. And it's really, unless you know a lot about acoustics and human anatomy and the nasal passages and different resonant cavities up and down the body, there's not much I could really say to explain it. You have to know about that. And that's like easily an hour-long lecture in itself. But suffice it to say, different consonants and vowel tones resonate in the body. And it happens no matter what, but if you know, understand, and use pranayama in combination with that knowledge, now your speech becomes really powerful. You can heal your body, you can change your mental states, and you can affect external reality. But most of that comes through practice, okay? So everyone has an innate ability, but there's an infinite scale of improvement through practice. You know, there's no top limit to it. And the way I can illustrate that is, think about driving a car. I remember first time trying to drive a stick shift, or, you know, maybe driving on some back road and then going out into big traffic on a city street or a highway, and like how complicated it seems that first time. But think about now, dude, I can make videos, I can fucking eat and make videos, you know? People do all kinds of stuff while they're driving, like automatically, a subconscious level. I'm not saying it's a good idea to do it that way, but I'm just saying people do, it's possible. So, and that applies to all kinds of complex tasks that we do. So wizarding is no different. And we all wizard it constantly. Now here's one way to illustrate that. I was talking about, okay, concepts and how our conceptions work, and how something we have in our mind as a concept of a hobby or a fun activity can become completely bland, unenjoyable, and rote, right? So we got to look at this thing called concepts versus percepts. Like, percept is what you see, what you perceive in the world, right? What's actually out there, quote unquote, right? Versus your concept of it, which is how you think about it, how you define it in your mind. Like, take any average object, like say take this log right here. Like, all kinds of people can look at that log and see that log and they go, oh, that's a log. you know, mentally, or maybe they don't even see it. Maybe it doesn't even register in their consciousness, right? But say 10 people register the presence of that log, and you know, a normal city dwelling cucklord who lives in a stack and pack has no real concept of what a log is, right? But someone who's lived in the forest their whole life and seen logs like alive as trees, you know, can identify what kind of tree that log is, can identify, you know, have seen that bark and that heartwood like in various states of decay through termites and fucking bugs and rot and moss, and so that person has a way more in-depth experience of the logness of that log, whereas most people will just label it log in their mind without any deeper awareness of the meaning of that. And so that gets into percepts and concepts again. Like your concepts can enhance your percepts. Like if you have many concepts and diverse concepts around different objects and situations, you can pick up on so much more subtlety within those. I always think about how a sound engineer hears a music track versus a normal person. Like, you know, they can hear how much reverb is used. They could probably even tell the shape of the room that it's recorded in if it's a live concert, you know. They could probably identify different products like by the tones. Like they could be like, oh, that's a Strat copy, or oh, that's, you know, these are dual coil humbuckers, or blah blah blah, just by listening, you know. And average person has no idea what those words even mean. So this gets into my point of how our concepts can deepen our percepts or they can distract from them, right? So now we're going to talk about thought forms, and this is highly related to the word concept. Like a thought form is okay, say there's as an object like a bicycle, right? Versus if I say my bicycle, right? Like if it's a person's own bicycle versus if it's some other bicycle. Like if it's their own bicycle, their thought form of that bicycle is much more detailed, you know, because they have a more 360 like experience of the bicycle, right? What it feels to ride on it and so on, you know, and where it came from and like all the different states that the bicycle's been through with them, you know. So this is an example of thought form and how thought forms can be weak and vague, or they can be detailed. And one key aspect of that is the emotional or mental energy that we have around something. Like say there's an object that you use as part of your work that's a dull drudgery. Like for example, I used to do a lot of farming and I had this auger. An auger is like this big ass machine that digs a hole with a drill bit, but the drill bit's like, I don't know, 2 or 3 feet long and 2 or 3 feet wide. And it's the whole machine probably weighs 200 and something pounds, or I don't know, they're big and heavy. And so we used to dig, and we would dig in this rocky, dry ass fucking soil. If Miguel ever listens to this, he'll know. He had these big welts on his hip because that thing would hit a rock and tweak, and the way he was standing, the handles would keep hitting him in the hip, and he had a big ass bruise. So like for him, when he sees an auger, like there's always going to be this subtle little resonant memory of that thing whacking him in the hip. You know what I mean? Whereas most people would look at an auger, they wouldn't even know what that is. Right? But he has this detailed memory and this detailed association. And the same goes for me. Like I used to be an accountant, right? So like if I see a 10-key calculator, I have all these different like ideas about that thing. I don't say that I resent it necessarily, but let's say, okay, a car crash. Like let's say you had a car crash with a certain car, and like you see that car again, there could always be this like subtle resonant stress and trauma from that, you know? So these are just different examples of how percepts and concepts can be connected, and how different emotional intensity of experiences. Okay, let's take a really good one. Let's say like, you know, the first girl that you get naked with and stuff. Like every girl that kind of looks like her from now the rest of your life is going to have a different little tone for you, because they're going to resonate to that, you know. That's just in one silly example. But or say you really, really like chocolate. You know, I love chocolate. But say like, you know, your reaction to seeing different type of chocolate, or like a really specific chocolate that you like, your reaction is different from everyone else's, because you have these positive associations or negative associations or whatever, right? So this gets into thought forms. So, okay, you can use thought forms for wizardry in your everyday life, and we all do, without exception, okay? Because there's the actual actions and situations that we live through in a day versus our thoughts about those actions or situations, right? Like someone who's had some certain annoyance happen to them over and over and over again, that really bugs them and really gets under their skin, you know? if any situation arises that even has a tiny resemblance, they're going to react stressfully or prejudge that situation or be trying to avoid or sidestep it before even anything bad happens, because they already have this like, okay, so that's an example. So we have all kinds of unrealistic thought forms. There's all kinds of activities we do on a day-to-day basis, and our judgments about those activities that may not have any relevance whatsoever. They could be entirely relating to some past experience, or judgments and predispositions about something, some flavor, some activity, some place, some person. Like, so our concepts can get in the way of our percepts. And so what I'm saying is these concepts that we carry in our minds can change how we react in a situation and change our decision-making process. And that could be a good thing. If you're very experienced, like, you can make better decisions, and you can detect tiny flaws in things and choose very carefully. But that can also work negatively, right? So what I'm trying to get at is, now that we see the reality of thought forms and these concepts in our minds, right? We see how important it is to be masterful with those, to see our own thought forms and to see our concepts versus our percepts, and how we see the world versus how it actually is, or how other people experience it. So to at least be aware of that discrepancy is like the first step, right? And then at a further deeper level, like, you become skillful with that. You be able to create thought forms and alter your own thought forms and change the way that you think about items, activities. And really, a super valuable, probably the most valuable wizarding skill whatsoever, is to put your mind completely blank, to be completely clear and crystalline and judgmentless with, with things, perfectly clear, and seeing it with great clarity and detail and discernment, right? That's where you want to get to. And like I said, going blank like that and getting your mind into this tranquil, receptive state is the most powerful and most important skill of wizardry. But in order to get to that, you need to know what it's not. You need to recognize the presence of thought forms in your everyday life. Now, here's where it gets good, is where we all have different opinions of our lives, and hopefully every person has some ambition or some hope of some improvement or positive change to our circumstances, right? That we want to create. And a lot of times we get frustrated because the things we want to create seem so difficult, or because we want them so much. Like, every obstacle and every detraction from that goal like stands out so starkly in our eyes. And so we can even become like, if we convince ourselves that something's very difficult or impossible or prohibited by something, then we will even create further obstacles beyond what's actually physically there. We'll tell ourselves that it's impossible, and we'll see tiny obstacles or tiny frustrations or tiny frictional things in the experience. We'll see them as impossible because we have this preconception in our mind, right? So this is where, these are kind of two poles or two sides of the coin, right? It's the clarity mind and it's the thought form mind, right? You want to use both. You want to see as clearly as possible and be imprintable and be open to receive guidance, number one, but also to receive just data of how reality is in some moment, in some circumstance. We want to be super clear and open to that without judgment, or at least have that capability. I'm not saying you should be blank all the time, but I'm saying when you enter into a frustrating situation, if you can do that and just go blank for a second and then contrast how you feel, the difference of how it is. And this gets into voidness and shunyata in Buddhism. And really I've heard so many lamas say that, really, because they if you really get them aside and talk to them person to person about all the miraculous shit, they'll be like, yeah. And you'll be like, how does he do that? How do they make stuff levitate? Or how do they bilocate? Or how do they project thought forms? Or even just visualize the mandala, like the basic sadhana practice, And they always say, with respect to these phenomena, that it's all tied up with shunyata. And that's the voidness within everything. Like, there's a changeability to everything, right? Nothing exists in this rigid, static way of absolutist concepts like we think about, or we want it to, because we want to have solid judgments of things, and we want to have solid opinions of things so that we feel like we understand our world. But the point is, everything's really in flux. Understanding that flux internally helps us to respond more adaptively externally and to have more realistic ideas.